Members, if you don't mind, please grab your seat. Start moving towards your chairs. We'll start up shortly.
Mr. Chairman, this is your governor. Can you hear me?
I'm going to start up in about 30 seconds. If you don't mind, please making it to your chairs. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the 2023 Joint Appropriations hearings between the House and the Senate as we look at the governor's 2023 amended budget and his 2024 proposals. Thank you, members, all for joining us. Just a few housekeeping rules. Any member is welcome in the committee room at any point in time. We do ask, if you don't mind, if there's a member of the Appropriations Committee and there are few seats, please defer the seats, if you don't mind, to members of the Appropriations Committee. Others who are watching, visitors and staff, you're more than welcome to have seats as well, but please, again, if you don't mind, deferring to members when you can, so that we can make sure that every member who's representing either 50,000 or 150,000 people here in the state have a seat at the table. 60 now? Thank you. I heard the members of Appropriations speak up quickly. I wasn't going to point out that the Senate's 200,000, but that's okay. That's okay. A few other housekeeping rules is drinks. Remember, in this room, I think the House has a rule that if you have a drink, please make sure it has a top on it. And then for our friends in the media, you're welcome to be in the room. I know in the past they just had the cameras, but y'all are more than welcome to be in the room. We just ask please stay behind the rail so it doesn't become distracting as members are walking up and down the sides, and presenters are doing that as well. The room's a little bit different today. You know that for many, many years we had leadership from Representative Terry England. Terry is at home watching, I'm sure. I'm sure he's got this front and center on his screen right now. Couldn't wait for us to get started. And he did a huge service for the House and for the whole state of Georgia for many years. And if you don't mind, I just want, if he is listening, if you guys would give him a round of applause again to... Chairman England, we thank you for the many years you devoted to our state. We're also proud for our new chairman, Chairman Hatchett. Welcome to the party. We know... We know you've been committed to this process for many years and that you are uniquely suited for this role, and thank you for joining us today. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we get started?
Well, this is, I don't know that I would consider this a party, but thank you, Chairman Tillery. No, I'm honored to be here, honored to continue to serve everyone in this chamber and everybody in the state in this role, and I'm looking forward to it. We've already been working hard together, so looking forward to great things. A couple of other announcements. We're following the governor's book, not tracking sheets. You'll be getting tracking sheets later in the week. And the presentations are going to be posted on the House Budget Research Office webpage under Joint Hearings tab after today. So are we ready to get rolling, yeah. Chairman Tillery?
I think we're just about there. Again, as one last comment, as you know, I said it tongue-in-cheek, welcome to the party. There is nothing that we will do in this building that directly touches more of your constituents than this document. So thank you so very much for your willingness to be here today, and I'm really, really proud that we have a full room and so much engagement. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, do you have someone picked for the invocation?
Yes, sir. I'd like to ask Brother Representative Reverend Al Williams to open us in prayer. How do we?
You mash your button, number 26. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of our freshman colleagues that don't know the power of prayer, give it another week and we won't be able to find you. You'll be somewhere praying. Let us pray. Oh Lord, our Heavenly God, we thank you first for the victory and the opportunity. I ask you, Lord, that you bless us as we meet on this very important business. Let us keep in mind that the state of Georgia depends on us, so we do it with an open heart and an open mind. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Williams. This time we're jumping right into the agenda. We have the distinguished pleasure of being able to represent or to welcome our governor to join us here today. Our governor, as you may have seen, is out representing our state across the pond. And Governor, we are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for your leadership and congratulations again on second term. Members of the committee, welcome to you now, the 83rd governor of the state of Georgia, Brian P. Kemp.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Tillery, and good morning to you all. I just first want to thank you for having me this morning. Certainly want to pass along my congratulations and accolades to Chairman Hatchett. I know he's going to do a great job in his new role, and certainly appreciate Representative England's work over the years, and had the pleasure of working with both of you guys, and I know that we'll continue to do that. I also just want to acknowledge the rest of the members of the Appropriations Committee and other members of the Georgia General Assembly that are there with you this morning. It is afternoon in Switzerland, and I had the honor of holding greatest First Lady in the country, Marty Kemp's hand, while Representative Williams did that prayer, so I appreciate that. But as you guys know, I first of all just want to apologize for not being there in person. That had been my intentions, but this is just a great opportunity for me to be out here to share Georgia's success story with people from around the world, because I believe they can certainly learn a thing or two from us. For anyone wondering why I'm here, I'll be happy to tell everyone how others can benefit from hearing about our conservative principles and our approach to both budgeting and job creation to take the path that we've been on in our state. I'm very proud of my conservative values. I'm also not afraid to stand up and share them and how good they are and what our state's been doing with others around the country or others around the world, even when I may be surrounded by a few people that disagree with us, which that happens, as you guys know, right there underneath the Gold Dome in Georgia. But that's what, our jobs are to do, is to fight for our position and tell people what we believe and why we think we've been successful in our state. And that's exactly why I'm here, to tell them like it is, whether they like it or not. And that's how we're going to continue to do it in our great state. And it's how I'm going to continue to do it as your governor. And that's exactly because of those shared values and our work together over the last 4 years that I'm able to do this, because we've had great partnerships with you all, the members of the General Assembly, and we certainly look forward to doing that again this session. People around the country and around the world are waking up to the fact that Georgia's way is working. When you see more people working than ever before in the history of our state, they start to notice. When you see an unemployment rate that is lower than ever, lower than most other states, they start to notice. When you see us announce the 4 largest economic development projects in history in a single year, with just those projects alone bringing 20,000 new jobs and over $17 billion of investment, they start to notice. When they see that we've helped create over 140,000 new jobs and bring almost $60 billion of investment in Georgia in 4 years, they start to notice. When they see a red state like ours fast becoming the e-mobility capital of the United States and maybe even the world, they start to notice, and not without some envy, quite honestly. When they see we've had unprecedented levels of revenue, all the while returning taxpayer money to the people, they really start to notice. And for a lot of them, they think that you have to raise taxes to get higher revenue. We've shown them that you can grow the whole pie while the government takes a smaller piece and still have enough to feed everyone. We're also showing them that government doesn't have to dictate how to live or believe in order for people to be successful. In fact, most of the time, government needs to just get out of the way. All of these things and more are a result of your hard work, and I can assure you that I am here promoting the fruits of your labor. The budget recommendations that I put before you for both the FY23 and FY24 are designed to build on that good work, to make our communities safer, our schools more successful, the healthcare options for our citizens more plentiful, and to maintain our position as the best place in the country to start, operate, or grow a business, all the while keeping the budget flat and state government lean. Much like our national championship winning Georgia Bulldogs, we've had back-to-back years of record economic success. And because we budgeted wisely and conservatively, we've seen surpluses unheard of in modern times, especially in other states like California, which is projecting a $22.5 billion deficit. Georgia's success has continued even while the nation endures 40-year high inflation and the risk of recession because of bad policies coming out of Washington, D.C. To help hard-working Georgians and their families weather those bad policies, these budgets deliver on promises I made during my reelection campaign. The first is the second income tax refund, returning over $1 billion in surplus funds where they belong, back in the taxpayers' wallets. Just like I did last year with your help, eligible Georgians will receive $250 as a single filer and up to $500 as joint filers. The second is a property tax relief through a $1.1 billion homestead exemption program that will provide every eligible homeowner around a $500 savings on average for this tax year. I'd like to remind you all that both of these items and the state gas tax suspension that saved Georgians roughly $1.7 billion last year were all things that the leadership in both the House and the Senate and I worked on before they were formally announced. I want to thank you all for that. These budgets also put money where our needs are greatest, especially when it comes to closing the workforce gap. You'll be glad to know that while I'm here, Pat Wilson and I are inviting job creators from around the world to come to Georgia and see firsthand why our business-friendly approach provides the best environment for success. This will ultimately add even more jobs to the unprecedented levels we've announced these past couple of years. To meet the needs of this transformational opportunity, we need to ensure that Georgia students receive a quality education that will prepare them for a good-paying job beyond the classroom. The most valuable and in-demand resource in our state right now is our people. We need to keep them and the pipeline of skilled workers wide open to keep up with that demand. The pipeline starts in our K through 12 system, where I'm proposing an additional $1.9 billion between the amended and FY24 budgets. These funds will provide a $2,000 pay raise for teachers and support staff to help recruit and retain our best and brightest in the classroom. No other administration or group of legislators will have raised teacher pay by this much, this quickly in state history. We can all be proud of that distinction. These funds will also offset the cost of certification to help our skilled paraprofessionals become classroom teachers, further growing the ranks of this vital profession after the challenges of the pandemic drained so many in our schools. These investments will make our classrooms more successful, but we also must ensure they are more secure. No child, parent, or educator should have to worry about the safety of a school campus. That is why through almost $116 million in the amended budget, we will provide every school in the state with a $50,000 school safety grant. This is on top of the $69 million we allocated for school security grants in 2019. I again want to thank the General Assembly for their support of that measure. I'm also adding almost $27 million in the FY24 budget to increase funding for school counselors. This will help address the emotional and mental needs of our students as we continue to move beyond the pandemic. As we continue to return to full normalcy in the classroom as quickly as possible, I'm recommending $25 million in learning loss grants. This will empower schools to provide supplemental services that fit the unique needs of their students, ensuring that they do not fall even further behind, both in school and in access to opportunity. But through our workforce development programs, as you know, begins in our K through 12 classroom. We know it must also extend well beyond into post-secondary education. The good paying jobs that come to our state require a next generation workforce with advanced skills. But too many of our workers of tomorrow are shut out of higher education because of rising cost and the years of debt that student loans bring. I'm proud to say that that will not be the case here in Georgia. Last year, the Board of Regents rightfully voted for the 5th time in 7 years to hold the line on tuition cost. And because of our investments in the current budget, they were able to eliminate the special institution fee, all while we ensure Hope scholarships and grants cover at least 90% of tuition. But like I always say, we should not be content to rest on our laurels. That's why my budget will invest a further $61 million annually to bring our Hope Scholarship and grant award amounts to 100% of tuition for the first time in over 10 years. For a student at our national champion flagship institution, that translates to roughly $1,000 a year in additional financial assistance. With the budgets before you, we will also encourage more students to enter the high demand career fields where our workforce needs are the greatest. My proposals to establish and expand loan repayment programs in law enforcement and the medical field to attract more people to these critical professions. These budgets also include a $130 million investment in our technical college system to construct 2 new quick start training facilities to support our growing electric mobility industry. As I said in my inaugural address just last week, Georgia will be the electric mobility capital of America by the end of my 2nd term. These facilities will go a long way in training the workforce needed to achieve that goal. All of these and other industries continue to grow in this #1 state for business. And to do that, we must confront the growing need for workforce housing head on. Hardworking Georgians should be able to live in the same community where they work. This is also the biggest challenge to us maintaining our rank as the best place to do business. Therefore, my budget will allocate $35.7 million to establish a rural workforce housing fund. This will allow us to partner directly with local governments in developing sites across the state to address workforce housing needs that come with these major economic development announcements. I also look forward to the ideas and solutions that will develop during the legislative session as stakeholders from across the board come together, hopefully before further state action is required. And as more Georgians find opportunity in every zip code of our state, we're also helping combat rising healthcare costs and increasing healthcare insurance options. Since the first year I took office in 2019, improving healthcare access and affordability has been a cornerstone of my administration, and I am continuing that focus into the 2nd term. That's why I'm recommending $144 million in the FY 2024 budget to increase access to health insurance through the Georgia Pathways to Coverage program and in reduce insurance premiums through the state's reinsurance program. Thanks to these programs, we have expanded the number of healthcare carriers in the individual insurance market by 250% since my first day on the job. And we've also reduced premiums by an average of 12.4% across the state, saving Georgians an average of nearly $1,000 on their health care premiums. Through these budgets, we will build on that success so Georgia families can continue to live, work, and learn in good health. These proposals ultimately show that building a bigger and better Georgia doesn't come from building out more government. It comes from building up our citizens, and that's why we're going to invest in them through these budgets. That's not only good for the economic opportunity of our hardworking people, it's also good for their schools, their communities, and especially their families. For anyone partisan enough to say that I'm not focused solely on state matters and what's best for our fellow Georgians, I trust that these budget proposals will demonstrate how out of touch these comments are. As I also said in my inaugural, I believe that Georgia's best days are ahead. Even after the records we have broken in bringing opportunity to Georgia communities. Through budgets like these, and with your help, we will achieve even greater success. I want to thank you all for your time this morning. I want you to know that the governor's office and the leaders in state government and the executive branch, we look forward to working with you this legislative session, just like we've done in the ones past, to continue to keep our state moving in the right direction. So I wish you all the best this week, and we look forward again to working with you as we continue the Georgia General Assembly legislative session this year. Thank you all, and God bless.
Governor, you got quite a round of applause from this room, so congratulations and thank you for your priorities that you've laid out. I also want to tell you that it means a lot that you took the time, especially how far you are away, to be here with us today. We really do appreciate that and appreciate the example you set of how important this budget hearings are, so thank you very, very much for that.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. I'm just glad it's 4 in the afternoon here, not 4 in the morning when I'm doing this. And I wish you guys all the best this week.
Thank you so much, and continue to represent us well overseas.
Thank you, Governor.
All the best. We'll see you when we get back.
Governor, I'd like to say, too, bring home some more jobs, and thank you.
We'll do it. Thank you, Chairman. Good luck to you all.
Thank you. Members, for possibly the only time today, we are ahead of schedule. And we are going to try to hold that. Our next presenter is the state fiscal economist, Dr. Jeffrey Dorfman, to give us a brief presentation and take many questions from you concerning the status of Georgia's fiscal health and the economy. Dr. Dorfman has told us in advance that he has left ample time for questions, so please be taking notes and prepare accordingly. Dr. Dorfman, thanks for being here, and Chairman Hatchett, you have something
Mr. Chairman, before you get started, we've had probably at least, I'm turning that volume down. We probably had 10 people that have come in and left because they couldn't see a seat. So if you got one next to you, maybe we'll do like we do in church sometime. Can you squeeze in and maybe take the one next to you and sit next to you, your friend and acquaintance and colleague, so they'll see some empty seats. Thank you.
And
the doorkeeper, if you can let some members in now, if they come, we'll have some seats, and some people are either leaving anyway. So.
Are there any members that are behind the rail who want to move forward? If you are, just stand up. And Senator Orrick, we've got several seats up here. Please come on forward.
Mr. Dorfman, looks like some people might be leaving. I mean, what's the sign here? I don't understand.
If you'd move to where you'd like to be expeditiously, please. Thank you, Dr. Dorfman. We're going to hand the floor over to you.
Hopefully it'll show my presentation. There we go. That's better. Thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Chairman, to talk to your committee once again. I would first like to begin by pointing out that this is back-to-back years I wore this tie for this briefing. As I suggested last year, I may wear this tie all year long. But it's very nice to do it back-to-back. All right, so as the chairman said, I'm going to try and be fairly brief and leave plenty of time for your questions. So I can jump into it. Sort of the first thing I wanted to stress today is we need to understand as we go into 2023 and everybody's talking about what's going to happen with the economy, that the U.S. can have a recession and Georgia cannot have one. Also, Georgia can have a recession and state revenues could still rise. Or state revenues can fall without Georgia having a recession. These are all separate events, and we need to understand that we are not tied that tightly to the national economy, and that revenues can vary surprisingly from the state of the economy. And I will explain more of that in depth, but I want everybody to keep those in mind, because I think that's going to be very important as we sort of analyze economic news that's likely to occur the rest of this year. This chart, for example, shows the line, the blue line that zigs up and down, is employment in Georgia. So that's the number of people in Georgia working. And the gray bars, the vertical gray bars you can see going from the top to bottom, those are national recessions. And then the red sort of dash bars that I drew across the bottom, those mark periods in Georgia where our employment declined. Okay? So you could think of the red bars as recessions we had in Georgia. The gray bars are national recessions. You can see we had a couple extra ones, although sort of two at the end, kind of right around one national one. But in 2014, we had a slowdown and there was no national recession. In 2019, we actually, if you may recall, we were cutting the budget just before the pandemic hit, which turned out to work out really well for us because we were more ready than a lot of states. That's because we were having that little slowdown in employment in 2019 that not all the country got. So you need to understand just that we can have it bad when the country has it good. We can have it good when the country has it bad. Also, how can revenues detach from the economy, you might wonder? Well, last fiscal year, we collected over $3 billion in capital gains taxes in the state of Georgia. Those are not tied to jobs. Those were tied to sales of businesses and profits from people trading in the stock market. This year, very few people have lost their jobs and employment in Georgia is up. But if most people are like me, we didn't make any money in the stock market in 2022. So we're not expecting to see any of that $3 billion in capital gains show up when people file their tax returns this year. I'll show you in a chart how big an effect that is. But that was huge. We literally, the surplus, we ran a $6.6 billion surplus last year. Over half of that was due to those capital gains taxes that we will not see again. And over a third of it came in about 2 weeks in April. So when you get those monthly reports and you see that it says we're running ahead of last year, you got about 2.5 more months of that. Because when tax filing season hits and we don't get that $3 billion, I promise you we will be behind last year. And that's why the amended budget has a revenue estimate that is considerably below last year's budget, actual revenue, even though you see in your monthly reports that we're collecting more money at this point than we had at this point last year. That's because we know we're going to get a big shock when those tax returns come in and people don't pay taxes on those profits they didn't make. Now, we can also have revenues detached from the economy in the opposite direction. All this inflation we've been having means that even if we don't add a lot of jobs and we have been adding a lot of jobs, but even if we didn't, people are getting wages increases, which means they're going to pay more in income taxes. And when we all go to the grocery store and we buy our groceries, we know that it costs a lot more. That's true of all the stuff we buy, and that means we're paying more in sales taxes. So we'll collect some extra sales taxes just because of inflation, even if the economy doesn't grow. And then finally, the big kicker is corporate income tax. We collected $2.5 billion in corporate income tax last year, an all-time record. We need to understand there are 300,000 corporate income tax filers in the state of Georgia. 96% of the corporate income tax comes from 6,500 of those 300,000 returns. So 2% of the businesses pay 96% of all the corporate income taxes. To give you an idea of how sort of crazy that is, on the personal income tax side, to get 96% of our income tax revenue, you have to include over 60% of the returns. Okay? So we're not getting our personal income tax just from a few rich people. It's all the Georgians paying. But on the corporate side, it's a very small number of big corporations that pay all that tax. And if they don't make as much money, that spigot shuts off very quickly. All right, so how are we doing after those ones? How are we doing right now? So this shows income tax withholding collections by the state of Georgia. Each line is a different year. The thick green line that's up near the top, that's FY23 so far. The red sort of purple line that's up there with it, that's FY22. So you can see last year and this year, we're collecting most withholding. This is wages and salaries. Okay? This is the money we should expect this year because we're not going to have all that capital gains tax. And you can see that we were running ahead of last year and we've kind of matched it the last couple of months. So this is maybe an early sign of that slowdown that everybody's been talking about, whether the Federal Reserve is going to engineer. Okay? But still, consumers are earning plenty of money. That's good. We're getting withholding tax, and that means they can afford to pay the prices on things. Now, this shows how we're going to get hit when that capital gains doesn't come in. So the bottom pie chart shows for fiscal years 2017 through 2020, the share of our total personal income tax that came from regular withholding. And you can see it was 100%. So what that means is that payments with returns and estimated quarterly payments are exactly offset by refunds. Okay? We collected as much from estimated quarterly and people when they filed their returns and sent in extra money they owed, exactly the same amount as we then sent out to people in refunds. So basically, withholding equaled our total personal income tax. Then you can see at the top in 2021, all of a sudden there's that slice of pie that's red. All of a sudden our total personal income tax was bigger than withholding because we got some early capital gains from the stock market boom after the pandemic lockdown. And then in 2022, we got 22% of our total personal income tax wasn't from withholding. Those quarterly payments and the return payments exceeded refunds by that 22%, okay, which is over $2 billion, okay? So as I said, we're not going to get that this year. We're going to go back. So the revenue estimate, the governor's revenue estimate, assumes we're going back to that 2017 to 2020 picture where what we're seeing coming in withholding is what we should expect. All right. Now, so we've covered how consumers are doing earning. How are they doing spending? The blue line here is sales tax. The red line is title tax on new car purchases. And what you see is for the last 6 months of last fiscal year and the first 6 months of this fiscal year, year-over-year gains for the same month. So April versus April, December versus December. If it's above the horizontal axis where you see the months, we grew, and if it's below, we fell. So what you can see is sales tax every month, the last 12 months, we've collected more in sales tax than we did the year before. And in fact, in a lot of the months, it's been over 10%. Why? Well, because inflation was running at pretty close to 10%, right? So the stuff we bought costs more. That means we pay more in sales tax. So the good news for all of you is, right, the state of Georgia collects revenue in inflated dollars. Inflation means we get more tax revenue. The bad news for all of you is when we spend it, everything costs more, right? So we get more money, but we end up being able to buy about the same amount of stuff with it, okay? But this shows that so far the consumer is not running out of money. Okay, they still have money left, and we hear this from banks, and I'll show you a couple other charts, but for example, this shows savings. Each blue line is the percent of people's income that they saved that month, and the red horizontal line is the historical average. And you can see early in the pandemic, people saved way more than normal, and now, for about the last year, we've been saving less than normal. We're spending down those pandemic savings. Why? Because of inflation, because it's taking, people have to spend that money to keep up with these prices. But we're still not dis-saving. If you notice, we're saving less, but the people still are not spending more than they make. They're still saving a little bit, about 2 to 4%. Okay? We've worked down, we started sort of at the spring 21, Georgians had built up $70 billion in extra savings. Combination of the federal government sending people money and people not spending while they were all locked down. We've now spent about $20 billion of that, but Georgians still have about $50 billion extra in savings that they didn't have before the pandemic. And according to top bank CEOs, that holds true for people at all income levels. Even their customers with the lowest balances in their accounts still have more money in their accounts than they did 3 or 4 years ago. So that means our consumers in Georgia are strong, and that should help our economy. Now, these is 2 charts on consumer debt. So the top one is total balances of credit card and other revolving loans, which basically means credit card and car loans. And then the bottom is delinquency rates. And what you can see at the top is consumers are piling up some credit card debt. That line's going up. But it's not above the historical trend. It kind of went down at the start of the pandemic, and they're just kind of catching up, right? That's people taking all those vacations that they delayed for a year or two. Okay? At the bottom is delinquencies, and what you can see is delinquencies have ticked up a little, and you'll see a bunch of stories in the news about trying to get you to panic because credit card delinquencies are rising. But if you look at that chart, historically, they're still very low. And I'm not worried that they're rising. They're still incredibly low. So I think the consumer is still handling their debt quite well. Now, this chart is the one that puzzles me the most, I suppose. This is corporate income tax by quarter. Blue is FY21, red is FY22, and green shows the 2 quarters we have so far in FY23. And you can see that businesses have done tremendously well, at least in sending us corporate tax. Now, if you listen to corporations when they report their earnings, right, the sort of big S&P 500 companies, their earnings have not gone up at anything like the rate they're sending us corporate income tax. So what explains this? Why are we collecting all this money? So first I'll say I don't know for sure. Okay, I wish I did, but it puzzles me, and believe me, Director Farr and the governor ask me fairly often about what's going on. And they'd appreciate if I could give them a better answer. But here's what I can tell you. First, corporations pay almost all of this tax in estimated quarterly payments, right? They don't do withholding from their paycheck. And then they file a return. And maybe they get a lot back. Maybe they don't like to owe extra money. So in general, they're not going to. It is possible that corporations, because they were still doing pretty well, have sort of prepaid a lot of taxes so that if the Federal Reserve slows the economy a little too much as we go into the second half of FY23. And they need to preserve some funds. They sort of don't have to give us as much the next 2 quarters because they sort of already sent it in. So I think some of this may be strategic. Second, we have this year the first year of the new entity level taxation option in Georgia, right? When the federal government did the Tax Cut and Job Acts, they limited the state and local tax deduction, which a lot of higher income individuals, including small business owners, did not like. And you, the legislature, saw the wisdom in providing them an option for working around that by paying taxes through their business for pass-through businesses instead of as individuals. To take advantage of that, they need to make estimated quarterly payments. We know we have gotten over $100 million at least in such estimated quarterly payments from pass-through entities. What we don't know yet is what they're actually going to decide to do. They're going to have their accountants figure it out both ways. They could choose to pay taxes as a corporation, and they may have also withheld as an individual, and so then we may get a huge refund request on their personal taxes. They may choose to file and pay their taxes as a person, and we may get huge refund requests on the corporate side. We don't know. DOR's watching. I'm watching. We can't tell you until we get, and unfortunately not even necessarily till April, because a lot of these people are the sort of people that file an extension every year and don't pay us till October. So we could end up with a lot of extra tax revenue in FY23 and a lot of refunds in FY24, just for fun. And again, this is one reason that the governor in his budget and revenue estimate has to be conservative. This is a year where there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen at tax filing season, because calendar year 22 is the first time that people get to make this choice. All right. The governor talked about jobs. This shows job changes in Georgia since February 2020, so since the start of the pandemic. We have grown employment in Georgia by 167,000 jobs since then. That's over a 3% gain during very tough times. That's something you and the governor should and can be very proud on. This shows by industry sector, and if you can read those, it says construction, manufacturing, trade, transportation, utilities, information technology, finance, professional business services, education, health services, other services, leisure and hospitality, and government. You can see we've grown jobs almost all across the board. Very small decreases in a few sectors. And in those sectors, it's generally because they can't get the workers. They'd like to be growing employment, and they're just having trouble finding people. But importantly, the sectors that have grown the most pay more. And so this has boosted personal income in Georgia and been responsible for a lot of the growth in tax revenue that we all have enjoyed the last couple of years. We have grown high-paying jobs in Georgia. Is this going to continue? Well, you hear about layoffs, but this chart shows layoffs in Georgia. I don't see a big increase. Sure, a couple of big companies are laying off 1,000 workers here or 1,000 workers there, but really, that is still very historically low. So the Georgia employment picture still looks strong, and frankly, a lot of the companies that have been laying off workers are information technology companies, and those information technology workers are being snapped up almost immediately by non-information technology employers that need IT workers. So if you lose your job at a Google or a Microsoft, then there's a lot of banks, insurance companies, and retailers who would love to get your tech skill on board. And so those people, even if they don't find another job, quote, in the technology sector, they're still doing the same sort of thing, just for another firm that wants to use those skills. Similarly, this shows now, I couldn't get job openings in Georgia. This is job openings in the South. I think Georgia's very similar. You can see they've gone down a little bit, but are still very historically high. And so while the Federal Reserve is cooling off the economy some, the economy still seems to be doing very well. So we hope they don't overdo it, and we can just achieve what we call the nice soft landing, perfectly killing inflation without killing the economy. All right, so what do we see? I wanted to give you a look at sort of what are the assumptions behind the governor's revenue estimate. So the way you get to those numbers, the idea is that income tax withholding is going to increase about 3.5% this fiscal year, even while total income, personal income tax is going to drop a lot because we won't get those capital gains. And then personal income tax withholding perhaps drop 1% in FY24. That's hedging our bets in case the Fed overdoes it. Okay? Hopefully we'll do better than that, but at this point we want to be conservative. We assume capital gains taxes disappear completely. That's important. The governor mentioned California's budget shortfall. California went from a $100 billion budget surplus to an over $20 billion budget shortfall because they did not correctly, well, they did two things. They didn't correctly budget for the disappearance of those capital gains taxes. They thought they would continue to get them, and California collects a lot of capital gains taxes. And the second thing is they spent a lot of that one-time surplus on ongoing programs. That's why the governor's committed to spending that one-time surplus on one-time expenditures. Okay? We also see corporate income tax shrinking this fiscal year and next fiscal year. That assumption has not been borne out so far in FY23. So maybe the corporations are going to make me look bad on that one, but that's what we're assuming because we think it is getting harder and harder for businesses to pass on their cost increases. There was a while there where costs were going up with inflation and businesses could raise their prices. We're kind of sick of those price increases. We think that's getting harder for businesses to do. And so if their costs go up and they can't raise their prices, what happens? Their corporate profits disappear, and there go our corporate taxes. We think sales tax is going to go slightly this year and then be flat next fiscal year. That's not so much because we think consumers are going to be hurting as much as we think consumers are switching back from spending more on goods and getting back to spending more on services, and we don't collect sales tax on all those services. So if consumers reallocate their spending away from buying stuff online or buying stuff in stores and going back instead to service sector expenditures, we collect less revenue. It's another example of how the revenue can be disconnected from the economy. That's not bad for the economy if consumers go back to what they were doing before the pandemic, but we don't collect the bonus revenue we got while everybody was buying stuff instead of going to the spa. All right. I wanted to leave you with a couple of future revenue growth challenges. The governor mentioned workforce housing, and this is why. We are essentially growing this economy as fast as it is possible to grow without more people, right? I kid the governor a lot about bringing in all these jobs, but he also needs to help us bring in people to fill those jobs, right? We need people if we want to keep growing. The blue here represents Georgia's population growth from 1980 through today. And then I put sort of a green trend line on there. And if you, like me, can remember the 80s and the 90s, where half of the fastest growing counties in the United States were in Georgia, we were growing our population a lot faster. That made it a lot easier to grow jobs and fill jobs and grow the economy. We're growing a lot slower now. Okay? That means we can't grow revenue as fast because we can't grow jobs as fast because there aren't as many new people here to pay the taxes. This shows population growth by decade, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and our projections for the 2020s. And you can see that it's just not what it was. We're now growing workers at less than 1% per year. Okay? We have unemployment in the 2s in Georgia. So it's pretty hard to fill jobs from unemployed people. If we want to keep filling these jobs, We got to bring more people in here. What do we need to do to bring more people in there? We got to address housing. And when we talk about workforce housing or affordable housing, we don't mean just low-income housing. We mean, where did the $200,000 or $150,000 starter homes go for somebody who's making $50,000 a year, right? You even make $75,000 a year. That means you can afford a $300,000 house at most, say. Those even are getting hard to find in a lot of the metro Atlanta and other cities in Georgia, right? Used to be able, you could get a 2,500 square foot starter house in Georgia for $100,000 or $120,000. And when I say used to, I mean like 8 or 10 years ago, right? Not that long ago. We need to figure out a way, and we look forward to working with the legislature on this, of bringing some of that back. And with that, I thank you for listening. And I think I left plenty of time for questions. That's what I was told to do. So, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorfman. I think I speak for all members here to say we really appreciate the time you put studying these issues and giving us the insight that you can. It is truly remarkable, and we appreciate everything you've done to get us to the point we are right now. You are going to have a couple of questions, and I'm sure you'll have some summaries from questions from me and Chairman Hatchett at the end. First question, Chairman Hatchett, you go ahead if you want to run it.
Didn't do me. Representative Oliver.
Good morning.
Morning.
Impact, if any, of the significant growth of corporate investment, out-of-state ownership interest in housing across Georgia?
That is a good question. I think I'm more sanguine about that than a lot of people. So first we need to understand that while this is a problem a lot of people are concerned about, it is unfortunately something where there is literally no data. We have no official statistics on this. What we have are anecdotal reports where people ask real estate agents or mortgage brokers who's buying the houses. There's no box anybody checks that says, I'm buying this as a rental property, or I'm an out-of-state investor buying a bunch of houses. So we're a little bit groping in the dark. It definitely appears to have increased. This is not the first time. Back in like 2010 to 2012, at the end of the big crash after the real estate bubble burst, investors were going all around Metro Atlanta buying every $120,000 ranch home they could find in the area. And their idea was they would rent them for 5 years, and then the market would be better, they'd sell them and double their money. And people made a lot of money doing that. So the fact that people are coming into Georgia and buying homes and renting them out doesn't mean it's forever. They may just be waiting till mortgage rates come down and it's a better time to sell those, or it may be a permanent trend. It is not necessarily a bad trend. One of the things we need, because housing has been more expensive, if we want to attract more workers, some of whom are 20 or 30-something-year-old families, they don't want to live in a rental apartment. And if they can't afford to buy a house, they want to rent a house. And so more rental housing, more nice quality rental housing is a good thing. So we have to kind of wait and see what rents do they charge, how does it go. It could be good, it could be bad, and I'm afraid, like, we're watching, but we don't know for sure.
May I do one follow-up, sir? Does it imply that we have to be thoughtful more so about code enforcement and keeping a vast new supply of rental houses provide adequate housing?
So that's another good question. That is, for the most part, a local issue, not a state issue, but I guess I'm unsure. I think one thing we may want to look at is how much some of our codes are adding to the cost of housing. How much are we making housing unaffordable, essentially on purpose? right? Because we require all these things to be included, and that raises the price of housing. But I mean, obviously, codes should be enforced. We don't want substandard housing in Georgia, that's for sure. So I think at this point, we're just kind of at the phase where we're nervously watching, and we're not sure yet.
Chairman Perkle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Dorfman, I got to tell you, that was an awesome job you did in summarizing our revenue estimate, and thank you for making it conservative. But it kind of reminded me, on my way up yesterday morning, I stopped and played golf with a few of my buddies on the way up, and they began by saying, you know, I got some new clubs, won't be playing good today, and then they just tore me out the frame on the golf course. And you spent 35 minutes talking about how we could miss this estimate, although it is conservative. What area, if you were looking at your golf game, of this revenue estimate, do you think, looking back in the future, you could say, well, this one right here most surprised me? Would it be that corporate income tax, or would it be one of the others?
So there were two things that last year surprised me, is a nice way, I guess, of putting that, you know, I messed up on. Corporate income tax was higher than expected last year. We were going off S&P 500 earnings estimates and other data sources we had, as well as just historical, you know, past data. And I did not think businesses were going to be as successful passing through cost increases to their customers, that they could grow profits as much as they did last year. The second one is, I did predict a big surge in capital gains taxes last year, but not big enough. And that was true everywhere. Every state I've talked to, the federal government, everybody missed the surge in capital gains. Well, I mean, not completely. Everybody knew we made money in the stock market. Nobody thought we'd collect that much in capital gains taxes last year. So every state ended up with big surpluses that they had not anticipated because of that. And now everybody's waiting to see, you know, hopefully adjusted for this year. But those were the two surprises last year.
Thank you. Great job.
Leader Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Dorfman, I have several questions for you. The first is on just the estimate budget. In 2022, we gained about $1.9 billion in 2022 over 2021. And then this year, you're projecting that we're going to lose $4.8 billion from 2022 to 2023. And then the following year, next year, we're going to pick up $300 million. How does that, I'm not sure how those numbers get there. I understand it's, you know, the conservative approach, but it seems like you're underestimating the surplus that's going to be. We go from $1.9 billion to $4.8 billion less to $300 million next year. Can you help me to understand why you did that?
So over $3 billion of that drop is this expectation that we'll get no capital gains taxes. So that's say 2/3 of that drop is the capital gains taxes going away. Most of the rest was my prediction of considerably lower corporate income tax collections than we've been seeing so far this fiscal year. So if there is a surplus at the end of this year, it will be, I suspect, because I missed the forecast on corporate income tax. That I thought corporations were already going to be seeing their profits squeezed because of the inability to pass on cost increases to their customers, and we haven't seen it yet. So either it's going to disappear the second half of the fiscal year, and everybody will congratulate me for seeing that coming and giving us the right numbers so we didn't have to cut the budget, or it isn't going to happen, and the governor is going to dress me down for producing another big surplus when he told me not to, right? So you know, that's the one that's keeping me up. And again, remember, in that mix, that we have this entity level taxation thing going on where we're pretty sure we're getting some, and unfortunately unknown, but 10-digit overpayment of taxes now as people withhold, as corporations and individuals, until they decide which way to pay their taxes.
Two more questions. The second one is going to a little bit about the surplus that we currently have. So we have $6.6 billion surplus. One is going to go back in rebates. Another is going to go back in property taxes and maybe gas. Another billion that leaves $3 billion left. What's going to happen with that $3 billion that's left?
So one of the things to know about my job is that I mostly do three things: forecast revenue, help oversee sort of fiscal analysis, and help the bond team in selling bonds in Georgia. I have surprisingly little involvement in how we spend the money. So
Got it.
all of you in this room will work with the governor on what to do with the other $3 billion.
Thanks. Last question I have for you is on debt service. Our debt service is low. It's been in probably 10 years. 3.7, I think it was maybe 4.2, somewhere in that space. Why is that debt service so low when we can go to 10%? I mean, under deal it was 6.8 or something like this, 7.2. Why is that debt service so low currently? And for me, it's a chilling effect when you think about the surpluses that are inherent in this revenue estimate, how that money can then be used. The government can use that money for something other than what's on paper. And so I just want to understand why the debt service is so low, and when we can go higher, why do we have artificially low, a debt service is, to me, artificially low.
Let me take that in two parts, because I think you said two things I want to address, and I appreciate the opportunity, because it's a great point you're making. The debt service is low for two reasons, I think. The first is just because interest rates were so low the last couple years, we have managed to get tremendous interest rates on the state of Georgia bonds. Investors want to buy state of Georgia bonds. So GFISC has just done a tremendous job, and we've sold them at very attractive prices, and we're just not paying much interest. Second, we've been able to cash fund more things, and so not issue as many bonds because we have this surplus, so why not use it to just pay for some stuff with cash? I don't think we should necessarily be raising that just because we have the ability to. We shouldn't be scared to take on debt when interest rates are low. But of course, they're not as low now as they were 2 years ago. And then the second thing, when you talked about the surplus and we could be doing things with that money, that's a very important point. The tricky part of my job is I have to balance two things. And this all goes back to a conversation I had with the governor on the day he appointed me, sort of getting my marching orders. If my revenue estimate is too high, then you pass too big a budget and you have to come back and cut it. Then we promise somebody a government program and we have to take it away. We have to cancel stuff we started doing. That's very expensive and very bad. So we really want to avoid that. If we're too conservative, though, if we put the revenue estimate too low, then we're not doing things we could have been doing that could help people, right? That's the inherent tension. So it's certainly not a free trade-off. That's why I got in trouble for a $6 billion surplus. Okay? The governor did not want me to give him a $6 billion surplus last year. Because then we're not doing enough stuff. However, we now have something new we didn't have before. If you went back 10 years, Georgia got a new $800 million or $1 billion in revenue every year, and it was very predictable. And outside of recessions, you could just count on the budget growing every year. Now, the revenue has become so much more variable. We were down in 2019, we were down a little in 20, and then we just surged like crazy in 21, 22. We know we're going to be down this year. Maybe not as much as I think, but we're going to be down. How do you budget in that environment? So now we have to look much more at where's the low spot in the next 5 or 10 years, And how can we build a sustainable budget so that we don't start programs that we immediately have to stop? And that's why the governor has looked in the budget, and I'm sure you will look in the budget, for one-time expenditures to do with some of these things, where if we have money now, but we can't count on having it for the next 5 years coming up, then we can't really do an ongoing thing with it. We need to find a one-time thing with it. But you raise an important point that those things are always in tension between trying to do too much and disappointing people and not doing enough and just having money sitting there.
Thank you, Dr. Dorfman. If we can ask y'all, if you got several questions, we got the boards just lit up, so just pick your favorite and best question. Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief, but sort of a follow-up on the workforce housing issue that we have, and a follow-up to Representative Oliver's point about corporate ownership of homes. And speaking to that data, I know anecdotally from our community, we're seeing a lot of businesses, corporations, and not just local businesses, but national corporations, they're buying up rental property. In addition, I anecdotally have even heard of in some very established, upper middle class neighborhoods, that real estate REITs, real estate investment trust, some of them foreign, are buying houses. And so when we talk about this to sit here and fuel this corporate, need to continue to generate business in Georgia, it seems to me you also got corporate America that's coming in here and maybe, if I can, investing in areas that historically they have not, from a point of view of getting in the community and getting our community out of balance with its housing issue. Because again, we want balance in all of our communities. We want homeowners, we want rental, we want affordable, but you got to have balance. So I guess my main question is what data do we have? And then how do we get more data so that we can make good decisions as we go forward in addressing this issue?
So it is unclear to me if there is any data. We know, right, sometimes when you apply for a mortgage, you do have to say, I'm going to own or occupy, or I'm going to rent. So technically, that data exists. I don't know how easy or hard it is to pull. But if a New York City real estate corporation comes in and buys a house versus a mom and pop landlord buys a house to rent, but does it through an LLC, they will both look like corporate owners. So we cannot easily distinguish between sort of distant corporate owners and local mom and pop corporate owners. That's the hard thing. And there's a trend now in the neighborhood I live in. We've had several houses bought in the last couple of years in LLCs to hide who the owner of an ordinary house that's owner-occupied is. And so I know for a fact that's not a rental house, but if you looked at the records and you see an LLC with an address in Nashville owning a house, you might easily think that's an absentee corporate landlord. But it's just a rich person hiding that they own, and I don't even know why they're hiding that they own a house in my neighborhood, but they are. So I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately, on how we go about collecting better data. There is no doubt it's happening. We know there's more corporate ownership of houses. We're just less sure yet whether this is good or bad and exactly how big a problem it is, or even how long-term a problem it is, or if they just see a short-term opportunity and they're going to be gone in 2 years.
Senator C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those same lines, when you start talking about my community, where housing is really looked at as having made it, because now you're no longer in where you used to be, but you're now in looking at housing where you can start having a place for generations to take on. But in my neighborhood, it's not happening like that. These slumlords, as so many are calling them now, not just in my neighborhood, but even I saw in Athens, where slumlords are being targeted because they are targeting our communities. How, I know you're not a magician, but you do work magic with numbers. But if you can kind of help me help them, because we're getting more calls of homes that folk mainly are seniors that have come to where they are now retiring and their income is changed. They want to stay in their homes that they invested in to go to their maker from. Can you help me with that? Any directions on what do we do about all of these people that are in a position of just taking over communities just for profit's sake?
Yeah,
if you give me a law, I'll write it.
I mean, I wish I had an answer for you. Certainly, I can tell you, to talk to Department of Community Affairs and see how they can be of assistance maybe. I'm just very unsure. I mean, I spent a lot of years working on growth and housing in this state, but unfortunately, I just don't have a good answer. It's a hard problem. It's a long-running problem. These people tend to be very difficult to track down and get to behave properly. And also, it's a local issue much more than a state issue. So I have sympathy, great sympathy for the people in that situation, and I wish I had an answer.
The last thing, though, is by and large, it's happening from my perspective in black and brown communities, and that's a real issue for homelessness. Thank you.
Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Dorfman. It was very informative. I wanted to drill down a little bit on the population numbers. So I welcome all the discussion on workforce housing. I do think that's a critical issue, but I wanted to circle back around to that because I would think a larger issue is falling growth. I believe in the last decade, the United States grew at a slower rate than in many, many previous decades, and we're still in better shape than many countries around the world. And I should note that our even the amount we grew would of course be due to immigration and not native birth rates. And I think the projections are that across almost the entire world, every country will be at negative population growth. Not the entire world, but most of it within not that many decades. So to me, that's a much bigger issue than what kind of housing stock we have, and it's going to face everyone. And I guess my question is, unless all those projections are radically wrong, is there something we need to be doing if our economy depends on population growth? What do those demographic figures, portend for us here in Georgia, and are there other things we need to be doing about that?
Sure, great question. And you're exactly right. The U.S. population was growing faster. Georgia was getting more than our fair share. We are still getting more than our fair share. We're beating most states, but there's fewer people that we're fighting over. Population growth at the national level has slowed. For the 3 years since the pandemic started, we ended up with 3 million fewer immigrants to the U.S. because immigration was shut off for a while. And so that would be, if Georgia just got an expected share of that, that would have been over 100,000 people in Georgia. So probably could have filled 60, 70,000 jobs. So that's a year worth of job growth that we could have had here from immigrants in the last 3 years that we didn't get. I doubt I'm going to be very successful, or that this General Assembly is going to be very successful at getting people to have more babies. So we've got to fight for the people that are there, right? So I think what I see as the thing we can affect, the easiest thing we can affect, is if there are families, young families with working adults in them that want to leave the snowbound, cold, decaying cities of the north and move to someplace nice and sunny and warm, we need to figure out how to get them to move to Georgia instead of Texas or Florida or North Carolina and South Carolina. Those 4 states, I think, Georgia, in terms of competing for people that are moving, we're in the top 10, but those 4 states are beating us right now, and we need to figure out what we can do to get some of the people that are moving to those 4 states to move here instead. But you're right, it's essentially, the game is getting harder to play because there's fewer people, so we got to step up our game.
Dr. Dorfman, I've just got to say that you mentioned us trying to help people increase the population, and the lights just went crazy. Everybody wants to say something. But we're going to stick to business. Chairman Lynn Smith, I think you have your button pressed in the back.
Thank you. I'm directly in the back. And thank you, as always, for your presentation. It's not only informative, but it makes us start thinking. And I want to direct my question to the need for more workforce housing, the concerns of corporate ownership property rental, less expensive homes in slum wards, to something more local. And for us as elected officials, our politics truly are local. Mm-hmm. And so the opposite side of what you're presenting to us today is, are we shifting the burden of our decisions and our spending to our local governments and therefore our property owners? I'm hearing that schools are getting more and more difficult at the local level to manage. I'm hearing that our roads are 2-lane roads, yet we're trying to build all of these different houses. How do we do that? And then I'm hearing how difficult it is to even get a regular garbage pickup service. And so as policymakers, even though we're looking at it through the lens at the state level, are we not creating more problems for our local individual property owners?
I'm not sure, did the state cause any of those problems?
The emphasis on growth and growth at any cost is what is doing it. So I hear that dialogue in my area as well, and I can't go anywhere without people saying, what are we doing policy-wise? Why are we going in this direction without servicing the new people coming in?
Sure, I got you. Okay, sorry. I spent 20 years running training sessions for ACCG and GMA on smart growth management. So these are important issues, and I've spent a lot of time on them. We definitely do not want growth at any cost. It is certainly true you can have growth come to your community that does not pay for the costs that growth imposes on those that were already there. And we need to try and avoid that. However, I don't think that more workforce, or a new word I learned recently that I quite like, what some people are starting to call attainable housing, right? Meaning what somebody with, like a $50 or $75 or $100,000 a year family income can afford. Those are probably not what causes that problem. And we have to remember that if we don't build housing, then we get that traffic on the roads. You want to know why that 2-lane road needs to be widened to 4-lane and is costing you $2 million per mile to do that? It's because the people live so far away from where they work. So if we could build more affordable and attainable housing closer to where people work, and if all our schools were great so that people weren't worried about moving to a good school district that was 40 miles away from their job, right? Then we could solve a lot of these problems. They're interconnected for sure. But I think the housing is an easier one to address than the others. We have, DOT has plenty of money to take care of the roads. I have no idea how to solve the trash pickup problem. I have that at my house sometimes too. But in terms of the sort of the roads, the schools, and the housing, I think the key is, I'll say one last thing. I actually had a grad student draw some maps for me recently. There were more counties in Georgia, so we graphed three things. Counties in Georgia that grew jobs from 2010 to 2020, counties in Georgia that grew population over that decade, and counties in Georgia that grew houses over that decade. The number one thing that counties did in that decade was grow jobs. The most counties grew jobs, second was grew people, and last was grew housing. We're falling behind on housing, and that's why I harped on it. Not that the other things aren't important, and not that they're not related, but I think we need to focus on the housing a little more than we have.
Chairman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Dorfman, always good to hear from you. It's always very interesting to me. The Chairman Hatchett's nephew serves in the Senate with me, Bo Hatchett, Senator Hatchett, and he is setting a really good example of what we need to be trying to do to grow our population.
I'm glad you said that, because I was, but I'm glad you're taking the lead.
But I want to change the topic a little bit. When I got the agenda for our budget hearings, I was very, very pleased that the chairman put state liabilities on the agenda, and we're going to delve into that this afternoon. I wonder if you look at the state balance sheet, so to speak, and could there be some opportunities for us with some budget surplus to take care of some of our, what I feel like are unfunded liabilities that could bite us down the road, particularly our workers' comp liability and our film tax credit liability, but there are probably others. I wish you would speak to that and see if you think there's some opportunities that we could address that future potential problem.
Thank you for that question that puts me in such a difficult spot. While trying to restrain from saying what we should do with the surplus dollars that we have, not having received any directions from the governor about this, I would certainly agree with you in principle that we should give a good look at using some of the remaining surplus funds to address some of those liabilities. I think that makes sense, and that has been discussed. And we'll see where that goes as the session develops, I think.
Chairman Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is that people that are not looking for work are not included in the unemployment numbers. Mm-hmm. Is that a significant number in the state of Georgia?
Ooh. Okay, so yes, so to be unemployed, you need to pass the following three-part test. Right? First, the government asks you a question, do you have a job? And you have to say no. Then they say, do you want a job? And you have to say yes. And then they ask, within the last month, have you applied for jobs with 2 different employers? So if you apply for 2 jobs at the same place, that doesn't count. Got to have gone to 2 different places and applied. So if you say, yes, I did that, now you're unemployed. So if you aren't looking for a job, if you're a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, or you're a 58-year-old retiree who retired during the pandemic, and you're not looking for a job, then you don't count as unemployed. And you're what we call a not in the labor force. In terms, is that a significant number? Well, it's huge. It's over a third of the adult population of this country is not in the labor force. So it's gigantic. So in Georgia, that's going to be a couple million, 2-3 million people. Has it changed a lot? No. It has gone up a little. So we have in Georgia, there's probably 40 or 50,000 more not in the labor force people than there used to be. Partly that's because we've gotten older. An interesting part of it is, one thing the pandemic changed is a lot of over 65-year-olds who were working part-time completely quit. So if you were 66 and still working full-time, you probably still are. But if you were a 70-year-old working 10 hours a week just to stay busy, you decided it wasn't worth the risk of COVID and you fully retired. And because we don't count people by part-time versus full-time jobs, and because you never age out of the workforce in the U.S., which is, I'll just say, stupid on the part of the federal government, but that's how they do it. Literally 90-year-olds are asked, do you have a job and do you want one? And so all the 90-year-olds retirees are counted as not in the labor force, right? But there is this new segment of elderly people that were working 10 or 15 hours a week that are now on zero. We also lost some more men of what we call prime working age, so sort of 25 to 55-year-olds during the pandemic that have not come back. Economists are working very hard to try and figure out what the problem is. I tend to be somewhat in the camp of, I think during the pandemic, when they were enjoying living on all the free federal money, they developed certain habits that may make them unemployable now, meaning they maybe can't pass a drug test. So making it of less consequence to use drugs that employers still are not willing to tolerate makes more people be not in the labor force.
Is that number significant? In other words, the
Again,
younger
it's
people
probably,
who could work. Yeah.
So it would be in the tens of thousands in Georgia, but it's not hundreds of thousands or millions.
Thank you.
Representative Basemore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Thank you for your presentation. And first, I want to thank Representative Washburn for the study committee that I sat on with him during the fall, and we delved into this subject quite deeply. Okay. And I'm glad we're still having a robust conversation about it and going to attack it. My concern is that we found out that we don't have enough units at all in Georgia to house individuals. And it sounded as though from some of the presenters that we're going to have to change some of the rules that we now have in place in order to build faster and more homes. Don't want to take away from the local control from our municipalities, and hopefully we will take that in consideration. And also, those corporations we found out are targeting certain areas, as Senator C made reference to, and not at a small rate, but a large rate. They are targeting certain areas to purchase homes, and that leaves out those individuals that live, work, and play here and will stay here. And I heard you say that possibly these corporations are only buying and renting for a few years, and then they'll sell. But how is that beneficial to Georgia's economy and to Georgians?
Well, thank you for the question. So I think you're exactly right that we need to figure out what to do with housing supply, and in particular, agree with your point that we need to figure out how to do it without interfering with local control. And that's what I'm working on, and the governor is working on, and he has one proposal in his budget that would be money to be partnerships with local governments, so that there's certainly no issue of local control. But we're looking at what some other states are trying to do, try and see if there are ideas out there that we can copy. incentives maybe that we can do when we're bringing in these big economic development packages. So if a county wants that new factory with all those jobs, what are they going to bring to the table in terms of promises that they're going to permit housing for those workers? In terms of the out-of-state investors and certain at-risk communities, again, I'm with you in being nervous about it, but I just don't have the data or information yet to be able to definitively tell you either that we have a problem or what the solution to the problem is. And I sympathize with the fact that by the time we know for sure, it might be later than we should have started acting. But I try not to advance opinions when I don't have evidence behind them, and I'm stuck in one of those situations where I wish I had a solution, but I don't feel like I do yet.
Chairman Dolezal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Dorfman, for your presentation. I first became aware of your work in your previous job when you did a number of studies on the cost to local governments on housing. And I pulled one up here in Morgan County as an example. When you did this particular study, it was a cost of about $250,000 to the county. It was the break-even point of the house, I should say, was about a value of about $250,000 when you looked at the county side. However, when you look at the school side, the number escalated pretty quickly to the cost to the locals on the break-even point of the house would be $1.5 million for a home value to break even when there's just 2 children in the home that are attending school. And so I'm curious, we're going to, I think, have a challenge here as we begin to attract these workers, largely, I think, who will have children in the schools. What's your thoughts around the shortfall? Because we're not going to build a bunch of $1.5 million houses, obviously. And so what are maybe the unforeseen consequences to the state budget and to local budgets as it relates to an influx of children into the system on houses that we endeavor to build but that we know will not come close to breaking even, either at the state side or the local side?
Sure, great question. So the answer is 2 parts. Well, 3 parts, actually. One is, it would be great if somebody could figure out how to make K through 12 education less expensive. And I don't have a solution to how to do that, but it costs a lot. Second, you need growth to be balanced. So one of the reasons that lots of people send 2 kids to the public schools, very few people live in $1 million houses, and the schools haven't gone broke yet, is because people without kids pay school taxes and businesses pay school taxes. And so you cannot be just a bedroom community. If you want to just be a bedroom community and house people that work in another county, your school district will go broke. So you need to attract businesses and housing in proportion. And then the third thing that you need to do, and this is unfortunately not particularly a state issue, it's a local issue, is we need to educate our local leaders to not give special tax breaks to seniors so they can avoid paying school taxes. Because the reality is, while your kids go to school, you do not pay enough in property taxes to pay for that schooling. The way it works is you pay some before your kids go to school, and you pay while your kids go to school, and you pay after your kids go to school. And in particular, apparently, Senator Hatchett is going to be paying for decades and decades and decades. But, right, that's... Right, that when people say, well, my kids are done for schools, why should I be paying? The answer is because you still owe from when they went, right? So those are the 3 things I would say. We got to grow in balance, and we got to not exempt a whole lot of people.
Dr. Dorfman, thank you so much. Members, if you would give him a round of applause and thank him again for his detailed presentation. We really do appreciate it, especially your comments concerning liabilities that I know we're going to study this afternoon. Members, it's 11:30. It's actually slightly afterwards. If you don't mind exiting for lunch, we will be back here at 12:30. Senate members, we have box lunches for you that'll be delivered to the Appropriations office at noon. But please be back here at 12:30 so we can start a very robust discussion, we hope, on state liabilities.
Hey, before y'all, can I have your attention 1 minute? Those of y'all, I just learned during our meeting that our messenger in the House, Betsy Theroux, she's also our media relations and the media services in the House. She lost her father last night, so keep her in your prayers. Thank you.